Good evening, everyone. We want to wish everyone a Gemar Tov and a meaningful year. Just to start, I want to thank Rabbi Goldberg. And when we started at the OU, what we've done is we refer to them euphemistically as Ocean's 12. But we've created a rabbinic fraternity what we feel are the 12 most dynamic rabbis in America. That ultimately on their shoulders, Orthodox Judaism, as it burgeons, as it develops in the next 20, 30 years, will be on their shoulders. And the head and the lead rabbi of the OU rabbinic fraternity is your own rabbi, Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg. I don't have to tell you what kind of a superstar you have and a dynamic duo in Rabbi and Rabbi Goldberg. But I find those kind words, he referred to me as a mentor. I cannot say that I'm his mentor. A peer, maybe, if I'm worthy of being a peer. And many of the changes we're looking to make at the OU in terms of being relevant, meaningful, engaging, the communities outside the tri-state area, North American Jewry. The guide and one of the people that is helping us and steering us in that way, hands-on, teaching, mentoring others, is your own Rabbi Goldberg. And I want to thank him for all that he does for the OU. Also want to acknowledge Rabbi Nachum Zach and Todd Cohn, two outstanding superstars who have come. As you know, you have 200,000 Jews here in Palm Beach County. And the reality is, we started this year an annual commitment into Palm Beach County of close to $300,000 a year. Because there are many young Jews who have no affiliation whatsoever, who don't have the beauty, the warmth, the dynamism of your congregation of BRS. And the reality is, we took two superstars. Rabbi Nachum Zach, who was our regional director in New York, and Todd Cohn, who transformed not only the youth of Kansas City and its Federation community, but literally all of Midwest Jewry. And it's a great honor to partner with them, to work with them. And I'm sure over the years you'll get a chance to work with them and as they become part of the BRS family as well. I want to acknowledge Rabbi David Silverman, who was my first teacher, who taught me and got me on the path to life, kept me out of prison and many other things. But Rabbi Silverman gets a tremendous mazel tov. His son Jerry, who was with the Jewish Camping Initiative and Foundation, was responsible over the course of the last 5 years for putting somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 Jewish children who had never ever participated in a Jewish camping experience, totally unaffiliated children, putting them into a Jewish camping experience. He has been chosen by World Jewry to be the head of the UJC, the United Jewish Communities, which is the umbrella to all Jews in North America. A mazel tov to Rabbi Silverman. Jerry, for sure, is an apple that does not fall far from the tree, and God willing, he's going to guide and lead each and every one of us. And Achron Chaviv, our board member, my friend, fellow member of TLS, our good friend JB, who was the Nasi, who was the president of this congregation, who was one of the leadership of the National OU. Great honor to be with you this evening. We have a difficult challenge as a Jewish people. The reality is, we have this term, the Judeo-Christian ethic. What does that mean, the Judeo-Christian ethic? I would take issue with that term. When you look at our Choshen Mishpat, our system of business ethics, of integrity, of how a Jew has to conduct oneself, day in, day out, that Choshen Mishpat, that section of Jewish business law, is the largest component of our Shulchan Aruch. It's the largest component of the Code of Jewish Law. By far, it is the most challenging, the most difficult, the most relevant. Somehow, educationally, we don't give it the emphasis that it deserves. The reality is, the typical Jew who's a member of the halachic community is quite well versed in the laws of kashrut. Is not bad when it comes to the laws of Shabbos, of Shabbat. However, in Choshen Mishpat, it's an area that unfortunately we're strangers with. And that's a tragedy. Because going back to that term, the Judeo-Christian ethic, when you look at Choshen Mishpat, our responsibilities to our Maker, our Creator, the Almighty, our responsibilities to each other in the realm of ethics and business, there's no comparison. You're not talking about the same universe. You're not even talking about apples and oranges. To the notion of a responsibility of a religious American in any other faith community, in any other theology. But somehow we've bought into this notion that how I do business, that's between me and God. That's for my heart. I'm a cardiac Jew. And it's not the case. The punctiliousness that we observe kashrut or Shabbat with, when you look, for instance, in the area of chumrah, of stringency, it's specifically in the area of bein adam lechavero, how we treat our fellow human being, how we do business, whether it's wholesale, whether it's retail, whether it's real estate, how we market our products, our services, our goods. That's what sets the Jews apart. And let's be honest, we have this term that we all use, Kiddush Hashem. The greatest thing a Jew can do on this earth is to sanctify God Almighty's name, to be Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. Where is Kiddush Hashem? If you look in the Gemara and Yuma, where does it manifest itself? In how we engage in business, and how we treat not only our fellow Jew, but our fellow human being. And the more one represents the Torah, whether it's wearing a yarmulke, whether it's having a Jewish name, whether it's being affiliated with a shul like the BRS, the greater the responsibility. We're going to this evening in the piece that I'm engaged in, which is the halachic piece. We're going to look at certain categories of Choshen Mishpat that sometimes we're not as sensitive to or familiar as we need to be. My peer, my friend, Rabbi Kerry Friedman, who you want to get back as a scholar in residence, actually is on staff, is a mentor and a teacher of the FBI, of many police forces in this country, has served as Jonathan Pollard's rabbi. And to those in the rabbinical community, it's his work, marital intimacy, that we use to train young men and young women when it comes to the most intimate, private part of what will be their marriage and the rest of their life. So he'll be speaking about the philosophical components. Let's start with a few categories. The Rambam Maimonides, when he ends off the laws of Hilchos Schiros, the laws of what is the responsibility of an employee, he says the following: HaPoel tzarich la'avod b'kol kocho. That as an employee, one has to give it their all. See, we look at Parshat Vayetze, and we think that Yaakov was this great tzaddik. Despite the fact that Lavan manipulated, draped him, backstabbed him, it says, V'tichalek es maskurti aseres monim. Lavan, in a 6-year period, he manipulated and changed his wages 100 times. Aseret monim, 10 times 10. So we think Yaakov was a great tzaddik. The way the Rambam understands Yaakov's engagement as a shomer sachar, is someone who was a paid employee to watch the herds, is not that he went above and beyond the letter of the law, but that is the basic tenet. That is the minimal baseline responsibility of a Jewish laborer. So what does that mean? HaPoel tzarich la'avod b'kol kocho. Let's say the person who held my position before me, whether I'm a secretary, an executive, or anything in between, let's say that that person was not as sharp, was not as good technologically, couldn't produce in an hour what I can. I have no right to say, look, I'm going to produce double what that person produced. And I'll make time, and I'm going to learn the Daf Yomi, and I'm going to say 30 Tehillim each day, so I'll go through the work week, I'll go through all Sefer Tehillim. I have no right to do that. Just because I can produce twice as much in 6 hours or 8 hours when the job demands 10 hours, and that's what's expected, I have to give 100% for all 10 hours. And if it means 100%, b'kol kolcho, I can produce 4 or 5 times as much, that doesn't make me a tzaddik. That's my bare bones obligation as an employee. We're all familiar with the Gemara, where the rabbis actually sliced the benching for employees. They were being paid per hour, so they're entitled to eat, they need their strength. However, when it comes to benching, no rabbinic, the fourth bracha, right? Don't say it. Don't say the bracha, because it's taking away from the boss's time. You can't be a tzaddik on Yedem's cheshbon. You can't be righteous on someone else's account. And not only that, the 2 brachas, Haaretz HaTova, which refer to God's gift of the land of Israel, plus the institution of the Beis HaMikdash, crunch those 2 brachas that are doraisa, that come from the Torah, crunch them into one bracha. That's what the rabbi said. Of course, you don't say the harachamans, which are appendages that come afterwards. That's how serious Chazal took the responsibility of an employee. And that means, as a physician, you have no right to moonlight if it's going to affect your abilities during the day to your primary employee. As a Rebbe in yeshiva, and we know they need to earn extra income just to be able to live in an Orthodox community, if you're tutoring, if your bar mitzvah lessons is going to hurt your preparations, it's going to hurt the way that you correct essays and prepare for tomorrow's class, you have no right to give the bar mitzvah lessons or to tutor afterwards. Just one simple category. What about a second category? Ona'as mamon. So we know the term ona, ayin vav nun hey, which means the obligation that a husband has to his wife, conjugally, emotionally, psychologically, time-wise. But what about with an aleph from Parshas Bahar, the second last parsha of Sefer Vayikra of Leviticus? We read it usually 2 weeks before Tisha B'Av. 2 weeks before Shavuot. It talks about a mitzvah called Lo Tonu Ish Es Achiv, Ona'as mamon. What does that mean? Ona'as mamon is for any of us who are either a service provider, a buyer, or a seller. Simple example. Let's say that I have a Lexus dealership here. Now, within a 25-mile radius of the Boca Raton Synagogue, for argument's sake, there are 4 Lexus dealerships. Okay? An LS 460, there's a certain price. It's a range. If you go to each dealer, depending on who's selling it, one might be a few $1,000s cheaper, one might be a few $1,000s more expensive, but there's a range. I get someone who comes here, a wealthy person from Europe, they're not used to driving a Lexus in London or in Paris, and they really don't know the market on the Lexus, and I can see I've got a sucker, and I can see they've got money, and they're not counting their dollars, their euros. So what do? Caveat emptor. Buyer beware. You're not aware of the fair market range of an LS 460? You're a schlemiel. You're a sucker. It's your problem. Absolutely not. Lo tonu ish es achiv demands that what? We don't say caveat emptor, buyer beware. I have an obligation of full disclosure, and I'm only allowed to sell within the fair market range. Again, we're talking about a product that's a commodity. We're not talking about that I provide better service or that I provide this or that. We're talking about what's called shava b'shava. We're comparing apples and apples. And by the way, it's not only on the sell, it's on the buy as well. Let's say I'm a stamp collector. I'm a stamp dealer. I'm a coin dealer. I'm a rare Judaica dealer. Nebuch, someone's uncle died, and they inherit their uncle's estate. They don't know what this is worth. It's a bunch of Jewish books. It's a bunch of coins. I come in there and say, you know what? You've got some old stuff. It's not mint. I'll tell you, I'll give you $10,000 for the whole batch. And on a wholesale level, the value on a wholesale level is $120,000, $130,000. We don't say caveat emptor. Lo tonu ish es achiv. It says, O kano miyad amisecha. Even on the buy, I have no right to do that. I have no right to do that whatsoever. And if I do, I'm in violation of an Isur D'Oraisa of Lo Tonu. And if I charge 25% of the fair market value, above and beyond the fair market value, then I have to give back that which I've overpaid. The court will extract it. Basin will come, and what they'll do is they'll freeze my assets. And if it's more than 25% above and beyond the fair market value, Batel Melkach. I apologize, you're absolutely correct. 20%. It's a sheet. That's right, it's 1/6. If it's 20% above and beyond the fair market value, it's choser, it retracts. And if it's more than 20% above and beyond the fair market value, then it's Batel Melkach. The deal is null and void. That's how serious the Torah and Chazal were about. And by the way, this is no different when it comes to a service. Let's say that I'm a plastic surgeon. So if I'm this masterful surgeon, the man with the golden hands, who every actress that still wants to get the same part she was getting 6 years ago comes to me, so I can say, I'm the man with the golden hands, I do a better job, I'm a better craftsman, you pay for a better service. Same thing with an attorney, right? There are bankruptcy attorneys and there are bankruptcy attorneys. They're not all the same, they don't provide all the same service. The judges are not all in awe of certain bankruptcy attorneys. There are others that they are. But let's say that's not the case. Let's say it's something simple. Removing a growth from a certain part of the body. That's not the face. It's a standard procedure. It's not a deep growth. If every other physician is charging X, if there's a range, I have no right to charge above and beyond the range. The attorney or the accountant, if it's a standard procedure, we're talking about buying a residential piece of property. Closing costs, what the attorney costs are. If there's a fair market range here in Palm Beach County, I cannot charge above and beyond that range. That's Onas Mama. And then in that Parshan Bahar, this is another category that's brought up. Onas Devarim. What is Onas Devarim? I can't be manipulative with my speech. And there are many manifestations of that. How do I conduct myself? How do I speak to people? Is it the Sefer Panim Yafis? Is it a warm, nice radiance to my face? Or am I a pit bull terrier? I bark at people. Why do you ask such a stupid question? Who are you to say such a thing? You talk too much. Stop it. Intolerable. Intolerable. Talking to young children, right? There's certain things I would never say to an adult because they'd knock my block off. But when it comes to a young child, because I'm bigger than them, because I'm an authority, the abuse that young children suffer at the way we speak to them. That's just in basic social intercourse. But there's a business component of Onas Devarim as well. And it's not me, the pit bull terrier, and it's not me barking or growling at someone, but it's the following situation. I live in Beverly Hills. So I'll give you an example. There's a boutique shop on Rodeo Drive, or there's a boutique shop on Sunset, and they pay their employees a significant amount of money, and they pay a fortune in rent. And anything I want to know about what they have to sell, let's give an example, you want to have a stereo system, a surround sound stereo system for when you watch the ball game, when you listen to the opera, whatever it may be, that reproduces reality. I know nothing about a surround sound stereo system. I do know one thing though. There are certain sites on the web. If I knew what I wanted to buy, I'll go to those sites on the web and I'll get it at a Metzia. But see, I don't know what I want. What am I going to do? I'm going to go to the boutique shop on Rodeo Drive, or I'm going to go to the boutique shop on Sunset. And I'm going to sit there and I'm going to pump the salesperson who's an expert in this for 15, 20 minutes to get all the information I can get. Not ever letting them know that I have no interest in buying there because I'm not interested in paying their rent. And I'm not doing it as a pit bull terrier. I'm doing it, I've got maple syrup, I've got honey dripping out of my lips. I'm so sweet, I'm so nice, I am so warm. And I say, thank you so much for being so nice to me and caring. I'm going to think about it. I want to see if there are other prices around. I'm very appreciative. I never had intention of buying there. That is an Isser D'Oraisa. That's a Torah prohibition of Onas Devarim. That's abusive, manipulative speech. I built up their expectations. I built up their hopes. I manipulated them for information. That's Onas Devarim. We can't do that. It's one thing if I went in and said, look, there's a following website that I'm going to buy on, and unless you can match their price, which I know you can't, I don't have no intention of buying here. However, I'd like to ask you a bunch of questions, a series of questions. If I do that, and then the person wants to give me their time, that's their choice. But that's usually, that person's not going to give me 20 minutes of their time and all of their knowledge and their specialty. Another area that we have to be very careful in. Dina de Malchusa Dina. It's an Aramaic phrase. Whenever in Aramaic the letter Aleph is at the end of the word, it's the equivalent in Hebrew of the letter Hey being at the beginning of the word. So Dina de Malchusa Dina in Hebrew would be Hadin Shel HaMalchut Hadin. Right? The law of the land, the law of the government is the law. We know this from the Gemara, whenever the government wants to legislate anything that's associated for its own benefits, it provides services. And if it's for the benefit of the government, we as a citizen of this country are bound. The contingency that the Torah says that gives us a right to be a citizen of this country is that we follow the conditions of the government. It's a religious imperative for every Jew to be snow white when it comes to paying their taxes. let me use a better term. There's no way it's not the best term. It's a religious imperative for everyone to be Rabbi Soloveitchik or Rav Moshe Feinstein when they pay their taxes. And by the way, this is the Malchus HaChesed. This is the same government that in our 2 millennia-long diaspora, we have never ever had anything that compared to this country. The Jews have never ever been treated nearly as well. There's a name that we fabricated for the period of Islamic Spain when the Moors crossed the Iberian Peninsula and they took over Andalusia in central Spain. We called it the Golden Age of Spain. Let's be quite honest, there was nothing golden about it. In comparison, in contrast to Christian Europe, it was really outstanding and wonderful, but only relative to Christian Europe. You know Yosef Hanagi that we all quote, the famous vizier who ran the government of Islamic Spain? I'm sorry, Shmuel Hanagid, his name was Shmuel Hanagid. You know, he had a son by the name of Yosef. Guess what happened to him? The Islamic government blamed all the problems on him and they executed him for the failings of their government that had nothing to do with him. You know, that's the same period, the Golden Age of Spain, where the Rambam's family was expelled, had a choice of converting or being expelled. So it wasn't that golden. This is a golden Medina and a golden Galus. May not be perfect, but we've never ever had it nearly as good for this long, anywhere in our history. So for us to cheat, to weasel the government, and by the way, there's a term, and that term stems from anti-Semitism. But if there wasn't some inkling, if there wasn't some basis, that term would never exist. Don't Jew me, don't you Jew me. It makes me sick that when it comes to a manipulation in business, they say don't Jew me. We have to be the opposite. That's the basic halacha. That's not being a tzaddik, that's not being good, that's not an act of chesed, that's the basic responsibility of a Jew. And you know what? If you don't want to pay taxes, don't live here. Go to Iran, see what it's like there. Okay? Go to France, see what it's like there living as a Jew. But Dina de Malchusa goes farther than that. It goes much farther than that. It's a religious imperative. What did Avraham define himself as? So to speak, the poster that every Jew, or the bumper sticker that each of us would have on our automobiles. Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. Yes, I as a Jew am a ger. I am different. My notion of the Almighty is a totally different notion. My relationship with the Almighty is a totally different notion than other supposed monotheists in this country. It's so far different from Catholicism, from the Protestant world, from Islam, that you can't even compare. That's true, I am a ger. And I always will be a ger. And that's what makes me as a Jew unique and distinct. But Avraham said that there are 2 components to this dialectic. The second component of this dialectic is toshav. And that means that the Jew is first and foremost when it comes to civil responsibility. The Jew is on the front line when it comes to building the community, developing society, civilization, values, making the world a better world. We have a term, Hein Tzedek. Hein is a weight. The problem is if you look at the psukim, there's different terms used for weights. It seems to be a superfluous term. The Gemara always has a red light goes off in the Talmud whenever there's a term that seems to be unnecessary, superfluous. So why did it have to, if it told us about an ephod tzedek, and it talked about components of maznayim, of a mishkal, of weights, why did it have to mention hin tzedek? So the Gemara uses the drasha. You could read the word hin as hein. Hein means it's the affirmative, yes. A Jew's yes is their yes. Now, I don't mean, especially before Yom Kippur, God forbid to slander the left coast, of which I'm a very proud resident of. But I learned something in California. Yes doesn't mean yes. No means no, but yes doesn't mean yes. In California, everyone's being so nice and so warm and so wonderful, they can't look you in the face and tell you no. No, I'm not coming over. No, I don't want to do this. So they tell you yes, but you have to understand, yes doesn't mean yes. It means that I can't look you in the face and tell you no. A Jew has to live by Hein Tzedek. Our yes is a yes, our no is a no. And that's not easy, right? Because it means you're going to disappoint people. But integrity and honesty is not only defined in terms of deeds, it's defined in terms of words as well. Another issue. When it comes to weights and measures, lo yeh lecha bekischa even va'aven. What is the word lo yeh lecha? You can't have. It's a being verb. It doesn't say you can't use as a weight a dishonest weight, a dishonest measure, a dishonest scale. It doesn't say that. It says you can't own. A Jew is in violation not just for manipulating weights and measures. A Jew is in violation of Torah law. It's one of the Taryag mitzvahs for even having it in your possession. If there is a scale, a weight, or a measure that's not accurate, just for having it in your possession, you're over an Issa D'Oraisa. That, ladies and gentlemen, is not a Judeo-Christian ethic. It's a different notion of what our responsibility is. One canard that we would like to debunk in the next couple of minutes. This notion that we, the Jews, are this clannish group that discriminates and that hates and that based in our theology is a despising of anyone other than ourselves, it's not true. And what do they point to? They point to the whole issue of rivit, rivis. Rivis literally we translate as interest or usury. How can you say that? And by the way, the Rambam says that when you lend a Gentile, you must charge interest. Not everyone agrees with the Rambam. He says in mitzvahs, I say. How can you say that? So how do we explain rivas? Very simply. Charging interest is moral. There's nothing immoral, there's nothing unethical. If my name is Hertz or Avis, okay, and you want to borrow an automobile, you want to rent a car today, it's absolutely, positively moral and ethical for me to charge you for the use of my automobile. If I own real estate, you want to rent an apartment, you want to rent space, office space, you want to rent a storefront from me, it is ethical and moral for me to charge you for the use of my real estate, of my property. Likewise, we all know that when it comes to assets, when it comes to capital, cash, I have every right to charge you interest. 100% it's moral. There's opportunity cost. Look, even in the horrific economy that we're in today, and we know here in South Florida how hard this community has been hit by this. But if I could keep those funds and invest, whether it's in gold or in oil, those funds are going to return 20, 30%. If I lend them to you, I've lost out on 20, 30% annual gain. So there's nothing wrong. There's no difference between a piece of real estate, between my capital, or between an automobile. I have every right to charge interest. So if that's the case, why did the Torah say not? And it's very interesting. How did it refer to the object of interest that I'm not allowed to charge? It called my fellow Jew achicha. You know that song, He's Not Heavy, He's My Brother? You notice in many of the mitzvahs, we don't refer to a fellow Jew as reacha. We call the fellow Jew achicha, your sister, your brother. Where does that come from? If my mother would borrow money from me, if my child would borrow money from me, you know, I didn't say my mother-in-law, you notice that? If my child or my mother would borrow, I'm going to charge my own mother who nursed me, who raised me, I'm going to charge her interest? I'm going to charge my own child interest? That's my child, that's my family. See what the Torah says? You don't look at another Jew as a stranger. A Jew is not a stranger. They're not even a part of a covenantal community. You know that song by Sister Sledge? Remember the 79, the Pittsburgh Pirates? We are our family. Well, that's the Jewish song. We are family. By the way, that explains why we fight with each other so much. There's no fight like a family fight. But the Torah is inculcating us a mentality into us that your fellow Jew is not your fellow Jew. He's your brother, she's your sister. That's why you can't charge a Jew interest. Not because that's the moral thing to do. It's because the Torah is halachically demanding of us to treat them the way we would treat mishpacha. And by the way, it's the same thing is true when it comes to the mitzvah of hashavas aveda, a lost object. If someone has lost something, it's gone. They've lost it. It's gone. It's no longer theirs. I find it, it's mine. If my mother lost something, if my brother lost something, my child loses something, I'm not going to return it? Of course I'm going to give it back to them. You treat your fellow Jew like your mother, like your child, like your brother. The Torah in many places inculcates that mentality into us. You know, you're all familiar. It's a challenge that I had as a rabbi in the 15 years in the pulpit, that Rabbi Goldberg has as a pulpit rabbi, that Rabbi Silverman had as a pulpit rabbi. It's a tremendous challenge when it comes to a wedding, not to offend, but to be insistent upon certain standards for who can be the aid. Because you understand one thing, the rabbi is not integral, is not important for the wedding. The rabbi is called a misader kiddushin. He's to make sure that all the halachas are observed. But you can get married without a rabbi. What you cannot get married without are two proper witnesses. There's no such thing. The ring on the finger and saying Harayat Mekadeshes without two kosher witnesses is a meaningless act. It's a totally insignificant, meaningless act. The witnesses make the marriage. Rabbi Chaim, Rabbi Soloveitchik's grandfather said, "L'kiyumei davar." They create the chalos kiddushin. They create the change of status from being single to married. So we all know you have to ask. The witness, do you observe the Shabbos? Do you shave with a straight edge blade? If you do, they can't. All kinds of halachas, bein adam l'makom. That we should know. That's the psak, and that's the halacha. But there's a question in the Gemara whether that's required or not. What the Gemara says is the bottom line of the Masechta Sanhedrin is not, see, that term is Rasha. Rasha here is not the English translation evil. You know what Rasha means? A sinner. In halacha, a Rasha is a sinner, not per se evil. Evil is a value statement. It's a sinner, someone who violates the halacha knowingly. But the one area of the Gemara everyone agrees upon is the area called Rasha de Chamas. What's Rasha de Chamas? It could be someone who's Shomer Shabbos and keeps kosher and davens in the minyan and has Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi Tefillin. But if they cheat on taxes, if they cheat in business, if they overcharge, if it's the coin buyer who underbuys, if it's someone who's in violation of anything associated with financial gain, that everyone in the Gemara agrees upon is invalid to be a witness. So you have a real problem as a rabbi. We ask as a rabbi, and I don't mean to offend, but when we ask, do you pay your taxes absolutely correctly? When you have an opportunity, do you cheat people in business? I don't mean in a way where you take money out of their wallet. I mean, you do something that's not legal. It's not according to the Torah law. It's not according to secular law. And if they're in violation, this couple's not married. They're living in sin. It's two single people who are engaged in the act of intimacy. It's not a husband and wife. And the same goes for the ketubah. And you know, rabbinically, midurabanan, a husband and wife can't be together. They can't live together without a kosher ketubah. It's a very serious business. Rabbi Breuer would limit who he would choose the witnesses. He didn't allow the families to choose them. Rav Hershel Shechter, Rosh Kol of Yeshiva University, who many times has come and taught Torah in this shul, he tells a story. He was at a Seder Kiddushin, and they called, one was from the Choshen side, every set of witnesses, one from the Choshen side, one from the Kala side. And the witness from the Choshen side is sitting there. He's a big rabbi, runs an institution, and he doesn't come up. And the people around him say, you were called up. So he said, you know what, they'll find another witness. And people didn't understand. Why didn't he go under the chuppah? What happened? Came out in the papers that week. He'd been indicted for cheating the government on some kind of lunch program. So Rav Shechter said, at least in Erlich Hagam, if he was, he didn't want to ruin these people's wedding. He didn't want to destroy their Kedusha. Now, there is something what the Gemara refers to as a gun of Nisan and a gun of Tishrei. I'll give you an example. Let's say that as an employee, the practice in my firm, the laws in my firm say that any frequent flyer miles go to the company, don't go to me. In most firms today, frequent flyer miles go to the employee. They can use them for what they want. But let's say that I'm not familiar what the policy is. And I just assume that my company is like every other company. It's not like every other, like most companies. And now I take the frequent flyer miles and I take my family and my wife on a vacation. I'm a ganav. But that's a gun of Nisan and a gun of Tishrei. I thought it was okay. I thought it was permissible. That person's not invalid. I'll give you another example. The secretary takes stamps or uses the Pitney Bowles machine. She uses the phone in the firm for making long-distance calls to her family. She spends time on the job talking to her family and friends. She thinks it's permissible. It's 100% that's gazela. And she's stealing from the boss. She's stealing from the firm. She didn't realize. She just assumed it was permissible. Such a person is not invalid. It's known as a gun of nisim and gun of tishri. But what's very important is thievery, stealing, is not just about something concrete and tangible. It's about benefits as well. Anything that accrues to be the classic example, according to Torah law, unless the company forgives on it and gives it to the employees, but anything that accrues to me under my employ for the firm belongs to the firm. Mitzias poel lebal habayis, the Gemara says in Bava Metzia. It belongs to the firm. You have to be very careful. We have another problem. We as Jews are very careful about many areas of our observance. When it comes to, I don't know if we should get this on the camera. See right here in the back pocket? That's where my wallet is, where it counts, right? When it comes to there, somehow God doesn't play a role. I'll give you a classic example. We are all familiar with Parshas Mishpatim. Weil ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These are the ordinances. These are the halachos of jurisprudence, the halachos of business, laws of the whole social interconnectivity of society. They must go before the dayanim. Eila ha-mishpatim asher tasim lifneihem. These go to the system of Choshen Mishpat, to the courts that adjudicate according to Choshen Mishpat, to our system of Beit Din. What happens? The most frum Jews sometimes, when it's a lawsuit with another Jew, running to the courts. They take out their nuclear arsenal, the attorneys, right? They've got their whole slew of attorneys, and they're running to the court system. If God is relevant on Shabbos, if the Almighty is relevant that you talk to Him, you have a rendezvous, a dialogue 3 times a day, if it's a relevant God, then when it really counts, in your back pocket, in your bank account, in your estate, why aren't you going to the Almighty? And this is a big problem we have across the board. And I know there are going to be responses to what I'm saying. People are not happy with different batei dinim, people are not happy with this, with that. I've got news for you. Even if that's true, there are some outstanding, fine batei din in this country. And they travel. In fact, I know one of your members here is Mr. Przansky, Wally Przansky. His son, Rabbi Steve Przansky, is part of a group known as the Beis Din of America, the Beth Din of America. Outstanding Talmidei Chachamim from all backgrounds, who many of them have not only theoretical knowledge, but practical knowledge in secular law. And what do? They will travel. They will come to a community and adjudicate a case. There are many very fine courts and fine batei dinim. If God is relevant, if the Torah is relevant, then in the areas that count the most, our bank accounts, our wallets, there's got to be a place for the Almighty there. And it's a terrible, terrible sin. Because what happens? 2 Orthodox Jews showing up in court with a big yarmulke suing each other. You know the Chil Hashem there? And the other thing is, in a based-in situation, there's a concept called pshara. Each of the litigants obligates themselves to accept pshara, which we're going to translate, for lack of a better term, there is no proper English term, equity. Equity. What is the idea? The role of the Beis Din, Rabbi Soloveitchik said, is not just to instill justice. It is. It's to define what is the halacha. But you know what else the role of the Beis Din is? Let's say it's the 2 of us. And we've been going to bar mitzvahs, we've been davening in the same shul, sometimes we even get invited to the same house for a Shabbos invitation. We've got to sit at that bar mitzvah or look at each other after this din Torah. We've got to go back and function in society. We may not be best friends. We may not be inviting each other over for Shabbos, but we've got to at least be able to function with dignity. Our wives have to function with dignity. So what happens? The role of pshara, because in many cases, I'm not talking about where it's black and white. Where it's black and white, it's black and white. And not to give a psak din that's black and white is thievery. It's stealing from the party that has been victimized. But let's say it's the following case. There's a contract. And the contract is nebulous. And you know what? I can read my interpretation of the contract, and you can read your interpretation of the contract. Or let's say I made certain assumptions in this deal and you made certain assumptions in this deal. And those are both, you can understand that how each of us could have made those assumptions. That's not a black and white case. If you're going to rely on the strict din, well, hamotzi mechaber alav haraya. If I'm sitting with the asset, unless you can definitively prove with two objective witnesses that you're correct or that the case is not as it seems, then you get nothing. Pshara is not like that. Pshara says, it's not, this is a gray case. This is a case that is nuanced, that is subtle, and that we can understand where. So it may be that they may divide up the pool, or the asset may be divided 60-40, 70-30, 50-50, whatever the case is. You don't have that in a court. I'm not here, I don't have to defend the system of Beis Din. To this community, obviously you know the importance and the meaning and the substance and the significance of Beis Din. But I'm saying, practical, for selfish reasons, Orthodox Jews should be going to Beis Din. Besides that, it's much cheaper than the attorney's fees that are paid. Besides the fact that it's what God wants, it's the Torah, it's our system. But just to be able to function after the fact with the other litigant. There's much more that we could address this evening. By the way, you want to hear I heard this shtick, this one blew my mind. You have people that they don't want to be liars. They know they're not going to report everything on their taxes. And at the end of the tax return, what does it say? You have to sign that everything that you've recorded and everything you've reported is, I'll use a Yiddish term, is ehrlich, is straight, is honest, is glatt. Right? So what do? They have a shtick. They sign their tax return first on an empty piece of paper, then they go back and fill it out. You hear such a thing? That's still midvar sheker tirchak. That's still a liar. And there's many other categories that we could address. I'd like to hear at this point from Rabbi Friedman myself. I just want to end on this point. This I heard from Rabbi Aaron Kahn. This Kimas Tshuva that we're having at BRS, we're having a number of them all across the country. We had one last week in Woodmere. We're having one tomorrow night at the Jewish Center of Manhattan. We're going to be having one after the holidays in the Romer Synagogue in Teaneck. We're having one in Or Torah in Chicago. We're having one in Los Angeles and Beverly Hills. So these are shiurim that the OU has a great honor of partnering with great communities like yourself throughout the country. Last Tuesday night, Rav Aaron Kahn, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva University, gave the Chazar Shir Rabbi Soloveitchik, one of the great students of Rabbi Soloveitchik, was the head of the Kol Elyon. He spoke on this issue. And he mentioned the following. Avram Avinu, the Baal Chesed par excellence, the man who was wreathing in pain as an older gentleman from a bris milah, who was so distraught that these three Arabs who were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, he had to get them to wash the Avodah Zarah off of their bodies in order, before feeding them. He would do anything for anyone. This is the Avram Avinu who went to daven and to pray for Sodom and Gomorrah. You know what Sodom and Gomorrah was? It was the biggest attack, the biggest slap in the face to Avraham. Because Sodom and Gomorrah was the opposite. Sodom V'Amorah, in terms of its ethics and morals, it was the opposite of Avraham. And those people were wealthy, they were successful, they had the best piece of real estate in the Middle East. He should have wanted them to be destroyed. Because what would happen is that would be the quickest way to attain converts to his system, to the system of ethical monotheism and his lifestyle. And he davens for them. And he has a whole debate with the Almighty. How can that same Avram Avinu, the paradigm, the poster child of Chesed, how come when it comes to Lot, his nephew, Lot who's been with him, who's traveled from Mesopotamia, who's been through the famine, who's been to Egypt and back, when Lot's shepherds, and remember, this was agribusiness, they were in the cattle business, that was the major sector of the GNP at that time in history, when his shepherds are not muzzling the cattle, and not muzzling the sheep, and they're stealing pasture land, and they're grazing on other people's properties, on pagan Canaanites' properties. How come he has to say, no, may I lie? How come he has to separate? How come that's it for Lot? Avram is the biggest Rachaman. He's got the most patience, he'll tolerate anything from any human being. He sees the divinity in every human being. How come he's got to separate? You know why? Because Lot wasn't a stranger. Lot is associated with Avram. In fact, at that point, Avram has no children. Lot is the heir to the throne. Lot is his flesh and blood. Lot is a major player in that community. If the community of Abraham is associated with dishonesty, if the community of Abraham is associated with a lack of integrity, then it undermines everything Abraham stands for. He has no choice but to distance himself from Lot, to expel Lot. He'll look after him from a distance, but he's not part of the community. A Jewish community cannot have a lack of integrity. A Jewish community cannot have duplicity. A Jewish community cannot have dray. It's intolerable. It's unconscionable, because then it's not a Jewish community. Then it's not Choshen Mishpat. It's not our Torah. And when Yosef, as he was being seduced, and no one would know, and no one would catch him, the Gemara in Sotah says it saw demus deyuk no shel aviv. He saw in his mind the image of father. You know what the image of father the Meforshim say he saw? When Lavan manipulated, as we said before, he changed 100 different times, a ceremony in a 6-year period. When Lavan did everything he could to weasel and backstab his father. And his father had every justification. Yaakov Avinu had every defense, every excuse, every justification to do whatever it would take to love him. He never thought of such a thing. He never did such a thing. You'll ask me, what about Esav? That was the spiritual legacy of the Jewish people. That was the integrity and the survival of the Jewish people that Rivka insisted upon. That's when it comes to a spiritual matter. An ethical matter, a moral matter, when it comes to treating another human being, it doesn't matter how duplicitous Lavan was. You don't take a cent. You don't take a penny that you're not entitled to. And everybody wonders, why did he go back for the Pachim Ketanim? The whole family was on one side of the Yabok River, and he goes back. Because you know what those little Pachim Ketanim are? You know, in California with the 99-cent store. I don't know if you have a dollar store here, right? This is not, you know what that was? That was going to be the heirloom for his children. This wasn't Pachim Ketanim. This was gold. Because this was money earned with integrity, with decency, with sincerity, in the midst of the greatest duplicitousness, in the midst of the greatest corruption. He maintained his integrity. This was the most cherished heirloom he could give his children and his grandchildren. So when this Ashes Potiphar, forget who her husband was, but bottom line is he took me out of prison. I was nothing more than a wretched slave. He gives me his whole house. He gives me the keys. He allows me to live with dignity, to administer his home. I could do this to him. I could do this with his own wife. He saw the image of his father. No son of Yaakov, no son of Yaakov Avinu could ever think of such a thing. This was the image that he saw of his father. And our prayer is this should be the image that we see in each other. This should be the paradigm. This should be the poster child for every Jew. And that the world should know that Choshen Mishpat is Chai V'Kayim, that ethics and integrity of the Jewish people defines and shapes and saturates our very being. This is who the Jews were meant to be. And God willing, this is who once again we will become. I want to wish everyone a Gemar Chasina Tova, a good gebenched year, a year of honesty, integrity, and of being not only Glad Kosher, but as Rav Breuer used to say, being Jews who are Glad Yosher. Thank you.